Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's study class. Again, we're studying the parables of Jesus. And today's parables are going to be a little bit different. If you remember from previous lessons, we'd already discussed how Jesus had, as planting the seed, his message of love of God, love of our neighbors, love of each other. And then we also talked about how things can come in and try to take that love away or interfere with that seed taking hold. And last week we explored in the parables about the kingdom of heaven and what that could mean if the kingdom of heaven was something internal, something that we nurture inside of us. And we left last week with the thought of, okay, how does forgiveness tie into love? And the reason I ask that is because most psychologists, most psychiatrists and therapists will tell you love is forgiveness is a manifestation of love. That you can't really love someone unless you can forgive them. Um, Now, forgiveness takes different forms. Um, Sometimes it's just something like, it's okay, no big deal. But sometimes it's very hard to forgive. And we're going to study what Jesus had to say about forgiveness, because if forgiveness is paramount to being able to love, and if Jesus told us that, you know, to love is the most important thing, then forgiveness is going to be right up there as well. And there are a couple of parables that we're going to study this morning that I think kind of go along with this as well. And the first one is the parable of the moneylender, which is found in Luke 7, verses 41 through 43. Now, before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about this. This is actually part of a much larger story um, found in Luke, and it actually covers from, say, verse 36 to verse 50, where Jesus is having a meal with a Pharisee, and his feet are anointed by the woman with the alabaster jar, and he uses this parable to teach Simon, one of his apostles, a lesson. And it's really worth your time to go back and read the entire exchange between Jesus and Simon. And honestly, it's fascinating for various reasons, but here's the one that always fascinated me. It's really the basis of some scholarly work. For example, this book, can see it, The Woman with the Alabaster Jar, and it's written by Margaret Starbird. Now, this is not a Bible study. This is not to say it is theologically sound per se, because she did not write it as a theologian or as someone who was studying or trying to write a paper on eugenic apologetics or anything. What she was doing was investigating in a way who was the woman in alabaster jar. And in fact, that book and some other writings actually became the basis of Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. So if you're real interested in that kind of thing, that the Gnosticism, the mysticism that was existing during first century Christianity, I would encourage you to read the passage in the Bible, and then you can read all that other, and it's real interesting. But if you're not interested in that, it's okay. It has nothing to do with the parable. I just found that this whole exchange between Jesus and Simon is worthy of another study for another day. But I digress, and I apologize. All right, the parable of the moneylender, Luke 7, 41 through 43. A certain creditor had two debtors, one who owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he canceled the debts for both of them. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon answered, I suppose the one for whom he canceled the greater debt. And Jesus said to him, you have judged rightly. Now, a little bit of background, so in case we've forgotten or it's been a while since we've studied a denarii, that's an ancient Roman coin. And it was approximately equal to a daily wage of a laborer at the time. So, if you look at 500 denarii, that would be equal to 500 days' wages. or approximately a year and a half, how much you make. 50 denarii, almost 2 months wages. And that's the way you can think about it. Now, if you're talking about someone who's earning minimum wage, which a lot of our laborers in this country do, a lot of people make just about minimum wage. 50, basically, you're talking about for a 500 denarii would have been approximately $30,000. Now, that doesn't may not seem like a whole much, but think about it. For a personal minimum wage, that's a year and a half's wages. Um, for someone who is, only 50 denarii, you're talking about much less, maybe 60 or dollars. So, or I said that it's 2 months wages. My apology. So I guess the way you might want to put it in perspective is this: think about how much you make a month. Not after taxes, just how much gross net. Is it 15? Is it $1,000 a month? Is it 1,500 a month? Is it 20,000 a year? Is it 30,000 a year? I don't know. You may make 70,000 a year. You may have a very comfortable job. I don't know. But imagine owing someone what you make in a year and a half, say in the neighborhood of $100,000. That's what you owe. And the other person owes approximately $10,000. Just put it in perspective. And Jesus said, okay, the debtor has two people. They owe him money. He forgives the debt. Which one of them will love him more? And Simon said, I suppose the one who canceled the greater debt. And Jesus said, you have judged rightly, which indicates this. Goes back to the study of we've talked about before. Sometimes you give all you can, and whether it's a little or a lot, you give all that you can, then that's all that's ever expected of you. Here's a situation where Jesus is kind of turning the tables a little bit, kind of going in a different direction, that he's saying, okay, I'm setting you up for something else. That if you have a big debt and it's forgiven, you're going to be greatly appreciated. If you have a small debt, you're still going to be appreciated. But think of the weight of forgiveness, of removing the debt that happened by the first person with the 500 denarii versus the second one. Jesus doesn't say that neither are grateful or one's not grateful, but he was trying to make a point to Simon that the more you forgive, the more somebody tends to love you. And that's the key. He didn't say how much are thankful, how much are people appreciative, how much of them love him more. Because like we said before, to be able to love, you have to be able to forgive. And vice versa, if we are forgiven a great amount, we have a tendency to feel love for that person because they didn't have to. There was nowhere in this passage that said the creditor had to. He could have called in his debts. He could have said, give me what I owed. He canceled both of them. One was a small amount, one was a great amount. And Jesus' point was, which one loved him more? So this is a lesson for us, in a sense, that if we want to show love, we show forgiveness. If we love someone, we forgive them. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard because a big amount of forgiveness is not as easy to offer. Any thoughts? Anybody would at this point would like to interject anything? Think about us today. Think about slights. We think about evil done to us. Sometimes it's not intentional. Somebody may cut us off in traffic and it just happens. Somebody may talk about us behind our back. Somebody may intentionally harm us. are those we love. And forgiveness can be difficult. I don't think it ever was meant to be. I think what Jesus was trying to say with this parable and the lesson he was trying to teach Simon, again, as part of a bigger sermon, was that when you forgive greatly, you're demonstrating the love of God. You're demonstrating the love of Jesus. You're demonstrating what we're supposed to be about. Because the more we forgive, the more the love is shown. It's, that's the way I'm looking at this. And again, this parable is setting us up for another parable we're fixing to read just a second. But so I look at this parable, like I said, as part of a bigger context, but that Jesus is basically setting us up for the next one. And that's in Matthew 18:23 through 24. And this is the parable of the unmerciful servant. And here again, Jesus goes back into the kingdom of heaven. Again, bringing us back to how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to make manifest this love. Verse 23, for this reason, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he began the reckoning, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. And as he could not pay, his Lord ordered him to be sold together with his wife and children and all his possessions, and payment to be made. So the slave fell on his knees before him, saying, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the Lord of the slave released him and forgave him the debt. But that same slave, as he went out, came upon one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. And seizing him by the throat, he said, pay what you owe. Then his fellow slave fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me, and I will pay you. But he refused. Then he went and threw him into prison until he would pay the debt. When his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to the Lord all that had taken place. Then his Lord summoned him and said unto him, you wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not have shown mercy on your fellow slave as I had mercy on you? And in anger, his Lord handed him over to be tortured until he paid his debt. Again, keep in mind, this is a parable about the kingdom of heaven. So while it may be something that could happen in real life, it's Jesus is trying to make a point, and he may be making it kind of, I don't want to say outlandishly, but with a lot of hyperbole. For example, a talent. A talent is approximately equal to 20 years worth of wages back at this time. And if you look at how much this slave owed, this slave, and again, use the word slave, you can use the word bondservant. It's definitely not the slavery we think of with the American slaves trade here when we became a country, because, you're talking about a slave or a servant, excuse me, that borrowed 10,000 talents from his master. So, this is not just, a strict ownership situation. Indentured servant may be a better idea. Sharecropper, American sharecroppers may be a better a way to look at it. And if you remember from your history, after slavery was ended in this country, one of the ways that landowners would tie former slaves and poor white farmers onto the land was by sharecropping. Loaned them a bunch of seed and supplies and the things at exorbitant rates. Then when the crop came in, expected the sharecropper to pay them back. Well, if they couldn't, the landowner, who also owned the shop that they had to buy the seed and supplies from, we'll extend credit another year, and we'll add that interest, that compound interest thing they warn us about with a credit card. This was happening to them. So they were continuously building up debt, building up debt, building up debt to the point that they could not pay. And it basically became indentured servitude, slavery, just a new form of slavery because they could not pay off the debt. So if that's how I kind of look at this, that basically Jesus is talking about sharecroppers. Um, and the first one owed 10,000 talents. Basically, that's 20 years worth of wages. Well, at minimum wage, a talent would have been about $300,000, and he owes it for 10,000 talents. That's over 3 billion with a B, billion dollars. This person owed his master. Now, I don't know about y'all. I don't have that money in my couch. I don't have it just in change in the cup holder. Um, I could work every day from now and until the end of the earth. I don't know that I'll ever make 3 billion, and it's staggering money. And we know that there are folks around this country and this world that are like tens and hundreds of billion dollars, and it's mind-boggling. But this person owes that much money, owes $3 billion. And there's no way he could ever pay that off. So he begged. So he's about to be sold, him, his wife, his children, everything. Basically, life is precious. Life is without value, is invaluable. It's priceless. I should use the right word. But the master is saying, Lord, I'm through with it. I'm cutting my losses. I'm tired of it. You can't pay me. You'll never be able to pay me back. You're a bad investment. So let me cut my losses. I'm going to sell you off. If it scatters your family, so be it. If you lose everything, so be it. I'm going to make back what you owe me because you're never going to pay it back. So I might as well get something. And he begs, please have patience and I will pay you everything. We know that's not true because we know there's no way he is going to be able to come up with $3 billion, not as a sharecropper. It's not going to happen. He's desperate. He's absolutely pleading for him and his family's life. And the master, out of pity, said, I'll forgive you the debt. Now, we're going to learn in just a second that debt was not an absolution. That debt was not unconditional, or excuse me, the forgiveness was not. And that's what I think sometimes happens with forgiveness. People say, well, you forgive them and that's the end of it. Well, no, it's not, because forgiveness has a tendency to be conditional, that you don't continue. If my child stayed out late after she was told to be in by, say, 11 o'clock, and she comes in at 11:30. All right. She knows she's in trouble. And she says, Daddy, forgive me. Okay, sweetheart, I forgive you. But it's understood that it's a conditional forgiveness, that you don't stay out late again. Because if it continues to happen, then you're not actually asking forgiveness, you're asking for absolution. You're basically saying, let me do what I want, and you don't hold it against me. And I don't think there's anywhere in the teachings of the Old Testament or the New Testament where it ever says, God says, do what you want, child. Just do what you want, and it's all going to be good. God gives us absolute love, but he puts conditions on it. And we're going to see this in just a second. All right, so out of pity, he releases the debt. But the same slave, the one who just basically was brought to his knees and said, please let me out, please don't do this, and was forgiven, finds a fellow sharecropper. I'm going to use the sharecropper analogy. I like it a lot better. But that same sharecropper went out and found one of his fellow sharecroppers who owed him 100 denarii. Now, remember, a denarii was a day's wage. So 100 denarii was basically a third of a year. Let's say, if you're working minimum wage, that's about $6,000, $7,000. Not a whole bunch of money. I mean, it's for someone who doesn't have anything, $7 is a lot. But it's just about $6,000, $7,000. And he grabs him by the throat. He's violent. It's not just a matter of confronting him. He actually physically lays hands on him in a confrontational, basically that I'm going to kill you. Give me what you owe. And his fellow slave fell down and pleaded, have patience and I will pay you. But he refused, and he threw him into prison until he could be paid. Here we've got debtors' prisons, one of the scourges of society that used to exist that were thankfully were taken out of English common law and in this country, because although it still in some ways exists today. Think about this way. A person owes a fine for speeding, can't pay the fine. And a judge says, well, you're going to go to jail until you pay the fine. If I'm in jail, I can't pay it. Well, somebody's got to pay it. Your family does. Somebody's got to come up with it. But the cruelty of it is, I owe you, but you jail me until it's paid, but there's no way I can pay it. So basically you have condemned me to life in prison for a debt, a small debt. And think about it. The first slave owed $3 billion with a B, $billion. The second slave owed about 6,000. Quick math, I think that's like 500,000% difference. Huge difference in what was owed. But this first slave, who was granted mercy, who was given a second chance, who was saying, you know what, we're going to forgive your debt, he could not turn around and extend mercy to someone else. This is a lesson for us. We ask for forgiveness for our sins, for our words and deeds, those things we have done, things we have left undone. And we have grown to accept and expect that it's going to be done, that in God's goodness, which is where goodness comes from, God. So, I'm getting off the track. When I say love God, that means to love goodness, love righteousness, love doing the things that are right, not just do them. Jesus said, love your neighbor, but to love God means you love loving your neighbor. It's even deeper than that. It's not just simply walking the walk. It's loving the walk your own. And sometimes that's just as hard as walking. Loving your neighbor is hard, but loving your neighbor can be sometimes even more difficult. But I think that's why Jesus said that's the most important thing, is to love God, love goodness. Here we have a slave, or sharecropper, who was given love, forgiveness from a great debt, but couldn't extend that love. Could not return that love, that forgiveness that he was given to his fellow. And when this fellow sharecropper slaves saw what had happened, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their Lord all that had taken place. And when his Lord summoned him, he said, you wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded. Should you had not have had mercy on your fellow slave as I have had mercy on you. And in anger, his Lord handed him over to be tortured until he paid his debt. Again, forgiveness was not an absolution, and it was not without condition. The master said, what was the condition? What was the absolution? Or what was the condition? You should have shown the same love and the same mercy that I showed you to your fellow. And because you could not and you would not only did the Lord take it, he was tortured, a worse punishment, because now the agony of existence until his entire debt's paid off. And we're talking a $3 billion debt. So you can imagine how long this soul is going to be tortured until he pays off. It's not going to happen. A lot of people in Christendom, they look at this as a parable about salvation and about the afterlife. And it may very well be. I'm not going to argue that point. That's for you to decide how you want to take it. But I look at this as if forgiveness takes a burden off us, and many people have said that when we forgive, a burden is lifted off of us, and we refuse to forgive this burden, then there's going to be a torture on our soul. We're not going to be whole. We're not going to be complete. How can we expect forgiveness for our behalf on our mistakes, our debts, our faults, if we're unable to forgive others of theirs? And the fact that that first slave owed so much makes us pause to wonder, how many things have I done in my life that I were forgiven of that probably I shouldn't have been? Forgiveness is not what is the exact quote I want to use? I'm getting old. I can't read my writing. Um, Forgiveness is a way we take burdens off ourselves, but it's a way for us. Somebody said before, when we forgive, what we're doing is we're allowing ourselves to be worthy. That we are allowing ourselves to accept the love that was offered to us. And when we forgive others, we're sharing that love. I may have said that backwards, and I apologize. Little thing popped up. To order to love, we have to forgive. To order to be loved, we have to accept forgiveness. But we also have to think that we're worthy of that forgiveness as well. In this passage, we see someone that probably didn't deserve forgiveness, received it. We saw someone that should have offered mercy, refused it. And then we go back up here to our previous parable with the moneylender, where Jesus is talking to Simon. You know what, Simon? Which one will love him more? And Simon answered, well, it's going to be the one who forgives the bigger debt. So here's a situation. How do we show love? How do we show the love of Christ? How do we show that the seed that we've planted, that we're weeds and not tares growing? I think it's a matter of forgiveness. Is it easy? No. Will we fail in that? Yes. But I think the purpose is that we've got to forgive. We've got to forgive our partner when our partner asks for it. I messed up. We've got to forgive our friends and neighbors for their slights. We've got to be willing to forgive any wrong. But that doesn't mean there's an absolution. That doesn't mean that, okay, my forgiveness gives you permission to continue to do it. I think this is the part of the lesson that people kind of forget, that Jesus did not preach, let people keep on doing evil. One of the interesting takes, the famous, the well-known passage where Jesus talks about, if someone strikes you, turn the other cheek. Well, that may not be just be a pacifist and let bullies beat you up. Turning the other cheek would cause a Jew to have to hit you with the left hand, which was unclean. And therefore you're basically resisting. You're basically not saying insult, but you're saying, I dare you to hit me. You cannot hurt me. You do what you are because you are beneath me. You are contemptuous. And I turn the other cheek. So you have to hit me with the left hand so that you have to demonstrate you're unworthy. And I think that's what Jesus is messaging here. Forgive great debts, forgive everything you can when you need to, because that is the love of God. But hold accountable those, whether they're co-workers, family members, leaders of our nation, hold them accountable when they do not show the love, because there's nowhere it says that, you know what, they've been given love and compassion and forgiveness, but they can go do what they want to, and it's okay because it's all forgiven. No, the parable tells you there's a reckoning. And that reckoning is, if you can't forgive others, your forgiveness will not exist. If you can't love others, your love isn't truly there. And that's what I gained from these parables when I read them, that the hard the hard truth, love, forgiveness, you can't have one without the other. Questions, thoughts, comments, ideas, takes? Okay. Let me cheat a little bit because I forgot what. Oh, I know what it is. Okay. All right. So we've talked about forgiveness and we've talked about love today, and how love and forgiveness goes hand in hand. But what happens when the unforgivable happens? What happens when you feel slighted? What happens when you think life's not fair? And how come they got this and I didn't, and I did just as much as anybody else? Well, Jesus had a parable for that. May have heard the saying, there's a tweet for that. Well, there's a parable for that. And we're going to discuss that next week. What happens, or what does Jesus say about when you think things aren't as fair as they should be? So I appreciate everyone joining us today. I think it was a very, hopefully you got something out of it, and look forward to seeing you next week.